Lydia's fingers brushed over the ornate carvings of the clock's wooden frame, her excitement bubbling as the estate sale attendant handed her the receipt. The piece was exquisite, a Victorian-era mantel clock with intricate scrollwork and a face tinged yellow with age. The seller, an elderly man with a gnarled cane and sunken eyes, hesitated before letting go of it. "It's got a history," he murmured, his voice rough like gravel. "Not a good one." Lydia dismissed him with a polite smile, dismissing superstition. She was a rational woman, after all. Back in her apartment, she placed the clock on the mantel, admiring how its gold filigree caught the dim lamplight. That night, as she settled into bed, an unfamiliar sound pricked her ears, a faint, rhythmic ticking. Her brow furrowed. She hadn't wound the clock, its key still lay untouched in the drawer. The sound persisted, slow and deliberate, as if counting down to something unseen. She told herself it was just the old mechanism settling. But as she drifted into an uneasy sleep, the ticking followed her into dreams, each click sharper than the last. By dawn it had stopped, but the silence that followed felt heavier than the noise. Lydia placed the antique clock on her dresser, admiring its intricate carvings despite the uneasy feeling it gave her. The seller's warning about its dark history echoed in her mind, but she brushed it off as superstition. That evening, as she prepared for bed, she noticed something strange. A single, wary strand of black hair caught in the clock's inner gears. Frowning, she reached in to pluck it out, but the moment her fingers grazed it, the hair twitched, as if alive. Startled, she yanked her hand back, but the strand remained, now slightly longer than before. Curiosity overcoming her unease, Lydia tried again, this time using a pair of tweezers. The hair resisted, clinging stubbornly to the gears, and as she tugged, it stretched unnaturally, coiling around the metal like a vine. A cold prickle ran down her spine when she realized it was growing, thickening, as if feeding on her touch. She dropped the tweezers with a clatter, heart pounding. Her cat Miso had been watching from the doorway, ears flattened. Suddenly, he let out a low, guttural hiss, his fur standing on end. He backed away, eyes fixed on the clock, then bolted from the room. Lydia called after him, but he refused to return, hiding under the couch the rest of the night. Alone, Lydia stared at the clock. The hair had curled into the shape of a hook, dangling ominously from the gears. She slammed the clock's door shut, but not before catching a faint, oily scent, like old perfume and something rotten. That night, she dreamed of long, black threads winding around her wrists, pulling her into the dark. Lydia lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her body rigid beneath the covers. The room was silent except for the slow, rhythmic ticking of the antique clock on her dresser. She hadn't wound it since bringing it home, yet it kept perfect time. Then, as the clock struck midnight, the whispers began. At first, the voice was so faint she thought it might be the wind whistling through the old house's cracks. But as she strained her ears, the murmurs sharpened into syllables. A woman's voice, trembling and desperate. "Help me, please." The plea was choked, as if spoken through clenched teeth. Lydia sat up, her breath shallow. The words weren't coming from the hallway or outside. They were emanating from the clock itself. She forced herself out of bed, creeping toward the dresser. The whispers grew louder, more frantic. "They stitched my lips, they trapped me here." Lydia's hand hovered over the clock, trembling. Then, as suddenly as the voice had started, it stopped. The only sound was the clock's steady tick-tick, tick. The next morning, she told Mark about it over coffee. He smirked, stirring his spoon lazily. "You're reading too many ghost stories," he said. "Old houses make weird noises. That thing's just some dusty antique." But Lydia couldn't shake the dread pooling in her stomach. The voice had sounded too real, too human. That night, she lay awake, dreading the stroke of midnight. When the whispers came again, they weren't just pleas anymore, they were accusations. You ignored the warning, now you'll see." A cold draft slithered across Lydia's neck. She pulled the blanket tighter, eyes locked on the clock. Something dark shifted inside the glass. A shadow that didn't belong. Mark wouldn't believe her. She was alone with whatever lived inside that clock. And it was getting louder. Lydia woke to the sound of rustling, a soft, slithering noise that made her skin crawl. She sat up in bed, her breath shallow, and fumbled for the lamp on her nightstand. The dim light revealed something impossible. The single strand of black hair she'd found in the clock's gears had multiplied. Dozens of inky tendrils spilled from the antique's casing, creeping across the floorboards like living things. They pulsed faintly, as if breathing. Her stomach twisted as she watched them weave through the cracks in the wood, spreading toward her bed. She leaped up, her bare feet avoiding the encroaching strands, and grabbed a lighter from her desk. With trembling hands, she held the flame to the nearest cluster of hair. It blackened and curled, releasing a foul, acrid smell. But the moment she pulled the lighter away, the strands writhed and knit themselves back together. Panic clawed at her throat. She tried again, pressing the flame directly onto the hairs, but they only hissed and multiplied, splitting into thicker, longer tendrils that snaked around her ankles. She stumbled back, her heart pounding. The shadows in the room seemed to thicken, shifting unnaturally in the corners. The air grew heavy, cold. Lydia's cat, usually curled at the foot of her bed, was gone. She'd hidden somewhere, hissing whenever Lydia called her name. Then she saw it, a dark silhouette, tall and gaunt, standing in the far corner. It didn't move, didn't breathe, but its presence was suffocating. When she blinked, it was gone. The whispers returned, louder this time, a garbled murmur just beneath the ticking of the clock. Lydia backed toward the door, but the hairs had reached the threshold, weaving themselves into a tangled web. She was trapped. The clock's ticking grew louder, more insistent, as if counting down to something terrible. She pressed her hands to her ears, but the sound seeped into her skull, the whispers now a chorus of desperate, muffled pleas. The last thing she saw before flicking off the light was the hair, thicker now, darker, coiling around the legs of her furniture, claiming the room as its own. Lydia stood in front of the bathroom mirror, brushing her teeth before bed, when the air grew suddenly cold. Her breath fogged the glass, and as she wiped it away with her palm, she froze. Behind her reflection stood a gaunt woman in a tattered dress, her skin waxy and corpse-like. The woman's hollow eyes locked onto Lydia's, sunken and unblinking. But it was her mouth that made Lydia's blood run cold. Stitched shut with thick black thread, the flesh puckered and raw where the needle had pierced. Lydia spun around, her heart hammering, but the space behind her was empty. The bathroom was silent except for the dripping faucet. She turned back to the mirror, half expecting the woman to still be there, but only her own terrified face stared back. Her hands trembled as she gripped the sink, knuckles whitening. "Just stress," she whispered, trying to steady her breathing. But the air remained icy, and the scent of something old and damp, like rotting fabric, lingered. That night she dreamed of fingers dragging through her hair, cold and skeletal. She woke with a gasp, her scalp tingling as if the touch had been real. The clock on her nightstand ticked loudly, though she hadn't wound it in days. When she glanced at it, a single black hair slithered from the gears, curling onto the wood like a living thing. Lydia recoiled, but the hair twitched, as if sensing her fear. By morning, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every mirror in the apartment seemed darker, the glass thicker, as if something lurked just beyond the surface. When she passed the hallway mirror, her reflection hesitated a fraction too long before mimicking her movements. The stitches in the seamstress's mouth had left their mark, not just on the ghost, but on Lydia's mind. She knew, with dreadful certainty, that the woman wasn't just trapped in the clock. She was everywhere. Lydia sat hunched over her laptop, the glow of the screen casting eerie shadows across her exhausted face. The whispers had grown louder, the hair thicker, and the reflection in the mirror more vivid. She couldn't ignore it any longer. After hours of scouring old newspapers and archived town records, she finally found it, a faded article from 1843. The headline reads, "Local seamstress condemned for witchcraft, sealed alive in clock." Her blood ran cold as she read the details. The seamstress, a woman named Eleanor Voss, had been accused of cursing the town's children after a series of unexplained illnesses. The townsfolk, gripped by fear and superstition, dragged her from her home. They sewed her mouth shut with black thread to silence her supposed incantations, then forced her into the very clock Lydia now owned, sealing her inside to die. The article ended with a chilling note. Her final words were a whisper. "I will unravel them all." Lydia's hands trembled as she connected the dots. The hair wasn't just hair, it was Eleanor's, growing from the clock like a vengeful force. The whispers were her voice, muffled by the stitches, pleading not for help but for retribution. The reflection in the mirror was Eleanor herself, trapped between worlds, her hollow eyes burning with centuries of rage. A cold draft swept through the room, and the clock's ticking grew louder, more insistent. Lydia's breath hitched as she realized the truth. Eleanor wasn't just haunting the clock. She was using it as a gateway, pulling Lydia into her nightmare, strand by strand. The hair creeping across the floor wasn't just a warning, it was a noose, and Lydia was running out of time. Lydia screamed as the black strands coiled around her ankles, tightening like serpents. Her fingers clawed at the floorboards, but the hair dragged her backward with unnatural strength. The whispers from the clock had grown into a chorus, pleading, laughing, demanding. The clock's face loomed larger, its hands spinning wildly despite being unwound. Shadows lunged from the walls, wrapping around her wrists like shackles. She twisted her body, desperate to break free, but the more she fought, the tighter the tendrils constricted. Her cat yowled from the doorway, fur bristling, but it refused to step closer. The clock's door swung open, revealing a void darker than midnight. A cold breath slithered out, carrying the scent of old fabric and rotting thread. Mark burst into the room just as Lydia's fingers slipped from the edge of her desk. "Lydia," he shouted, lunging for her. His hands grasped only air. The hairs retracted like a living thing, yanking Lydia into the clock with a sound like tearing silk. The door slammed shut, the ticking stopped, The room fell silent. Mark staggered backward, chest heaving. He wrenched the clock's door open, but inside was only darkness and the faint glint of gears. No Lydia, no hair. The next morning, sunlight spilled over the floor where Lydia had vanished. The clock stood motionless, its face cracked down the middle. Mark reached out, brushing a finger against the gears, then froze. A single strand of golden hair, the exact shade of Lydia's, curled around the brass teeth. It twitched as if breathing.